Good morning, everybody, and happy Earth Day. Good morning to those of you who are on the East Coast. I'm aware that people are joining from various parts of the world. Thank you for joining us for a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day and the launch of the NGO Climate Compact. I'm Noam Unger, Vice President for Development Policy, Advocacy, and Learning at Interaction. Today, excuse me, today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Mary Robinson, the Chair of the Elders, first female president of Ireland, former UN Special Envoy on Climate Change and Climate Justice Champion. We will also hear from Joe Ruiz, Director of the Global Humanitarian and Relief and Resilience Program and Environmental Sustainability at the UPS Foundation, and Sam Worthington, CEO of Interaction. Before we dive in, I want to mention a few housekeeping notes. Listeners can post questions in the chat box of Zoom. There will not be a verbal Q&A session given the very large size of the audience we've gathered for this event today and this launch. But if you're including a question in the chat box in Zoom, please be sure to include your name and organization when you type a question so that we can acknowledge that as we select the question to discuss. We'll likely not get to every question, but we'll do our best. You can engage in this conversation on Twitter, where we will be live tweeting using the handle @interaction.org and hashtag Earth Day and also hashtag NGOs for climate. That's hashtag NGOs, the number 4 climate. Lastly, this conversation is on the record. It will be recorded and posted to our website afterwards, and we encourage you to share it. I'd like to now turn it over to Sam Worthington. Sam, as many of you know, is the CEO of Interaction and has been a long-standing champion of issues affecting people around the globe and has been CEO of Interaction for more than a decade. Let me turn it over to Sam.
So thank you, Noam, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited as we sort of celebrate this 50th anniversary of Earth Day and perhaps even more excited by Interaction's launch of the Interaction Climate Compact with over 80 signatories and all the diverse leaders that are on this call. It is critical to address climate change as a chronic issue, especially amidst this COVID-19 acute and devastating pandemic. Earth Day was spurred by Rachel Carson's 1962 book called Silent Spring, and it became a national day of awareness on the environment, and ultimately was the brainchild of US Senator Gaylord Nelson, and has since then supported a nationwide movement against growing levels of pollution and ultimately about carbon. Today, as we reflect on what that day meant back then and what it means today, we recognize that 50 years later, we have a crisis on our hand. It's a crisis that requires urgent, decisive action, action that we can only do in unison. The challenge is universal, but it will play out in vastly unequal ways, and global cooperation from all sectors is an imperative. Similar to what we're doing in our COVID-19 response, this challenge seemingly brings together very distinct communities. At Interaction, we sort of brand ourselves as a unified voice for global change, and it is that unity that is needed here. The NGO Climate Compact we are launching today represents the largest collective effort that US-based development and humanitarian NGOs have taken to push for joint solutions to address what we'd see as some of the most significant crises of our time. And the time couldn't be more ripe. We recognize that in doing so, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, that there's a long-standing environmental movement here in the US and internationally with dedicated individuals who have worked at immense personal risk to themselves. And it is on the shoulders of these courageous leaders that we stand, especially the young people and the communities who are directly affected by environmental degradation. And it's because of them that we were able to launch this compact today and to add our voice to the choir. That 80 NGO CEOs have signed on to this commitment is incredible, and there are 4 key areas that we're looking forward to advance by 2022. The first is to educate stakeholders and advocate for public policy change. The second is to add climate and the environment considerations into all our programs. And ultimately, because this is also about personal action, it is about reducing our own carbon footprint and waste. And finally, to learn. We cannot absolve ourselves of the responsibility simply because we do not yet know how to do something. We must act. It is these 4 areas of commitments that intend to jumpstart a difficult conversation and to drive action. Through the compact, we're looking for quick actions. We cannot wait for the perfect. We must act on what we know and learn what we don't. And in future years, we aim to increase our ambition. Like Mary Robinson implored us last November, we have to make climate change personal. We of Interaction have been led by a cross-functional effort of our own staff, focusing on environmental sustainability, first measurement of our carbon footprint, and creating sustainable actions. It is only through hope and through the promotion of solidarity, through local action, through solutions to universal problems and mutual learning that we will take on this and other human challenges. And it is particularly remarkable that in the midst of this climate, of the diversity of this climate challenge that we face, the diversity and type of engagement of our members, from our largest to our smallest, faith groups of all denominations and types. We have organizations that are more progressive and more conservative. And we have organizations working on all aspects of human well-being, from food, water, sanitation, hygiene, refugee issues, democracy rights, governance, gender equality, disability rights, and many more. And we have many global faith groups and others, particularly health groups that are focused on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. And amidst this firefighting, they too have agreed that we must act together and address this other looming crisis. So with this brief introduction and sort of pride that the Interaction community is standing up during Earth Day 50, that I'm really thrilled to introduce Mary Robinson, who will be joining us. As she's been introduced, she is the chair of the elders and the first woman president, but I know of Ireland, I know Mary as a tireless advocate of an individual who has taken concepts of rights and justice and intertwined them with the risk and the crisis that is climate, and looked at what it must do and called us all to action. And as we take these first steps to action, I can't think of a better person to join us in this launching of the NGO Compact than Mary Robinson. So over to you, Mary.
Well, thank you very much, Sam, and happy Earth Day to everyone. It's actually a delight to be with you, to be with Interaction on this special event for Earth Day plus 50, when you are launching your NGO Climate Compact. I remember that lunch last November, and I do remember encouraging and maybe even pleading or imploring with you that you would come together on the climate crisis because it was so needed. And you did. I'm so impressed with the Climate Compact itself, but also with the fact that more than 80 of you have already signed up to it, and that you are very diverse as a membership, which is also really very important. When we were discussing last November, we had no idea of what was coming down the line, of the fact that we would have a new, unexpected, somebody call it a black swan crisis, COVID-19. Indeed, I remember well last January being almost in despair. I was so worried that we were already now in January 2020, the year when governments were supposed to step up with their nationally determined contributions. Business was supposed to step up, and we were supposed to bend the curve and have new commitment and ambition for the conference on climate in Glasgow, which was to take place in November. It's now, as you know, being postponed until 2021. I tried to hide my despair because the elders are mandated to bring hope, but actually I was feeling very low. And I think the reality is that the report in October 2018 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change did change the perception of so many of us of the urgency. And young people understood that urgency and were marching in their millions and doing their Fridays for Future to try to remind us. And what the IPCC said was that the whole world needed to stay at 1.5 degrees and not go above that, because the impact would be very severe, especially on more vulnerable areas. And that meant we had to reduce by 45% global emissions by 2020, which seemed in January very difficult because people just were not responding. It was business as usual. We were fossil fuel led and nothing was changing. And we were seeing the impacts. We'd seen them in 2019. We'd seen the fires in Australia. We'd seen the terrible cyclone, which never hits sub-Saharan Africa, but it did. It hit Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, and many lost their lives. And we were sort of not taking account of the number of people who were losing their lives because of climate change. And I'm not a scientist. I came to the issue of climate change through my work in African countries with my colleagues in a small organization called Realizing Rights. We were working on the rights that really matter if you don't have them. Rights to food and water and health and education. And I know that a number of you are humanitarian and development agencies, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it was then that I heard the saying, you know, things are so much worse. And it was because of the unpredictability of climate change. And I became aware of the injustice of climate change. And gradually, I realized that there are 5 layers of injustice, at least, when we talk about the injustice of climate change, which of course brought me to climate justice. The first layer is the kind of obvious one that those least responsible are disproportionately affected by the impacts because of where they live, because of the lack of resources, the difficulty of being resilient, etc. The second one is the gender dimension, which is huge. If you undermine poor livelihoods, who has to still put food on the table, who has to go further in drought for water? But also women are agents of change in their communities. So many women try to build up their communities. I wrote stories, a book on climate justice, and there are 11 stories, 9 of them involve women and 2 good men doing the building of resilience in their communities. The third layer of injustice is the intergenerational injustice, which children have really brought home to us, that it's not fair that they don't see that they have a future, and they're asking us to listen to the science. The fourth layer, which I would like in your NGO Climate Compact, you to think about very seriously, is the injustice of the different pathways of developed and developing countries. The pathways for industrialized countries were based on fossil fuel. We built up our economies, now we're trying to wean ourselves off fossil fuel. But for developing countries, they need to take their people out of poverty. They need to develop. How do they do it? Do they go the way that many of them said they wanted to go at Paris in their nationally determined contributions, to go green energy? That means they have to grow without emissions. So they need the investment, they need the transfer of technology, they need the skills, they need the training. And they're not getting that sufficiently. So they're also finding coal and oil and gas. That's their dilemma. And if we're not there with them, that is going to be a real problem of staying, for the whole world, of staying at or below 1.5 degrees. And the fifth injustice is the injustice to nature itself. I saw that when I was lucky enough to be at a scientific expedition in Greenland last August. I sat near a glacier and I had tears in my eyes as I listened to the glacier calving, because the noise and the intensity were not right. I could tell that there was something wrong. I was sitting in 18 degrees Celsius in Greenland in the end of August. It had been 20 degrees in July, and the melt apparently in Greenland has been appalling this year in terms of sea level rise. So nature, the lack of the biodiversity loss, the extinction of species, what we're doing to Mother Earth on Earth Day, we can think about that. So they are the sort of levels of injustice. So now, what do we do? I think we need to address both crises together. And this again is something that your NGO Climate Compact will really help you with. They're not different actually. And we can learn the lessons from COVID-19, and they are really good lessons. Some of them have already been mentioned. The lesson, first of all, that human behavior matters. We're collectively helping to solve this problem by complying with what we're being asked to do, to self-isolate, to socially distant, to protect the more vulnerable, to protect health workers. And we're doing it because we've made it personal, because we're personally afraid. We need to have the same feeling about climate and make it personal and have collective behavior. That's one thing. We need to have, the second thing that matters is government matters. There was a tendency to somehow minimize the role of government, but actually government at federal level, at state level, at local level, at city level, it all matters. And we will see where bad leadership will not help in COVID-19, just as bad leadership will not help in tackling the climate issue. And compassion matters. It's already been mentioned, the neighborliness, the care for those more vulnerable, the visiting the elderly, the offer of doing messages for those who don't leave their homes because they've reached my elderly age. I'm self-isolating in Dublin with my husband. I can't tell you how many offers of help we get on a kind of regular basis, not just because we're who we are or whatever, but actually everybody's doing it. And then collaboration matters. Collaboration matters hugely because we've seen the innovation, even in manufacturers of motor cars turning to ventilators, combining and searching for a vaccine, scientists, like a whole range of collaboration. And I want now to come briefly to some of the big solutions that we need to address for tackling COVID-19, but always with an eye to making sure we do it in a climate sensitive way as well. The elders joined in an initiative of Gordon Brown and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy, in a letter to the G20, in which we called former presidents and prime ministers and others joined with them in calling for a number of big steps. First of all, on health, a total of about $8 billion to go to support for the WHO, but also for vaccines and for what do you call it? I'm just trying to look for the word, the health word, therapeutics, sorry. And the second big step is the economic recovery with special drawing rights for emerging economies. The need for debt relief, 44 billion at least for African countries, so that they can address and build up their health systems and address the current problem. These are the kind of issues. And as well as that, we need to build back better. Today, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, spoke about the need on Earth Day to think about the climate crisis and link it with how we deal with the COVID crisis. And he had 6 action points, and I'll note them very quickly because I'm almost running out of time. Achieving on new jobs and business through a clean, green transition. Taxpayers' money tied to achieving green jobs. Money to make people more resilient to climate change. Public funds to invest in the future, not the past. End fossil fuel subsidies. And climate risks need to be featured and factored into the financial system. So these are the kind of big issues. But I think you, with your climate, NGO Climate Compact, have an opportunity to be a voice of those who need to be heard, a voice for the more vulnerable, to make sure that in addressing the climate, health and economic crisis, which is huge, we also do it in a way that thinks about the climate crisis that is behind the COVID crisis, linked to it, and needs to be dealt with simultaneously and in tandem and in empathy in every way. And let me finish with a succinct phrase that our beloved founder of the Elders, Nelson Mandela, used. He said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." And I think we need a bit of that attitude. It always seems impossible, but actually we're going to do it. And it's going to be done, like you got your compact together quite rapidly since last November. And it means having a sense that we're in this together, all of us, that we have to see it as a human and a nature-based, holistic approach. And I'm delighted that we're doing this on Earth Day, because that seems highly appropriate. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you, Mary. And I see many across the Zoom call clapping, even though they're muted, and very much appreciate that dose of both perspective and inspiration. Thank you for speaking now and so many times about the injustice of climate change, and also drawing on lessons from the current COVID-19 crisis response and observations on human behavior, the importance of government actions, collaboration. We very much appreciate it. And it's already sparked some questions. I do see some questions in the chat, and I encourage others to keep those coming. I will now turn to our next speaker, and then we will turn back to those questions for our speakers. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Joe Ruiz. Joe oversees the UPS Foundation's Humanitarian Relief and Resilience program, their global road safety efforts, and environmental sustainability programs. In this role, Joe leads UPS's disaster relief and resilience efforts and its work with governments, UN agencies, and NGOs to strengthen public health systems. Among other programs, Joe also oversees the UPS Foundation's environmental strategy to invest in areas that advance global environmental sustainability and support company initiatives, expertise, and priorities. UPS Foundation environmental programs focus on carbon reduction, research, standards, and thought leadership, as well as education, energy, and resource conservation. So, and these efforts include the UPS's Foundation Signature Program, which I hope Joe talks about or mentions, which is the UPS Global Forestry Initiative. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Joe for his remarks. Thank you for being with us today, Joe.
Thank you, Noam, and thank you, Sam, and all the Interaction members. I would be remiss to not say thank you for everything that you all do. In the last couple of weeks, we've been heard more of this term about being essential infrastructure. Well, we know at UPS that Interaction and its members are essential for global development, for humanitarian relief, and absolutely for climate action. And as one of the largest global logistics organizations in the world, climate action is a business imperative for us as well. And today, what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes to share with you, both on the business side and on the foundation side, some of the actions that we're taking and have taken to make sure that we are a good corporate citizen and try to demonstrate leadership in the climate space. You know, we're establishing ambitious goals and have at a time when our footprint as an organization, a global organization, serving over 200 countries and territories, is expected to increase, especially due to the growth in e-commerce, which we're all seeing during these times, where we no longer can go to stores, along with infrastructure investments to expand our network. We have committed to source 25% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2025. Our investments in solar and renewable natural gas are moving our business forward in a responsible manner. We set an enterprise goal to reduce our absolute greenhouse gas emissions by 12% through our global ground operations by 2025, and expanding use of renewable energy, which is key to reaching this goal. And since 2009, we've invested more than $1 billion in alternative fuel and advanced technology vehicles and fueling stations globally. You know, we're proud of our progress, but we know that there will always be more to do, and we're continuously working to create new solutions for our business and to make the planet better. One of those is that 25% of our total vehicle purchases moving forward will be alternative fuel and advanced technologies, so LNG, CNG, and electric vehicles. Our sustainability approach really starts with optimizing our operations, from reducing our carbon emissions and improving shipping strategies. We try to be more efficient. We're always looking for ways to reduce our impact on the environment. Our integrated network enables multimodal transport and gives us the agility and the flexibility to optimize the efficiency. For instance, we have a system called Orion, which helps us avoid over 100 million miles driven per year and 10 million gallons of fuel each year, which translates into hundreds of thousands of tons of emissions that are avoided on an annual basis. As I said, we test a variety of alternative fuel vehicles. We call this our rolling laboratory. We specialize this fleet of more than 10,000 vehicles, more than any other organization has on the road. And this fleet of 10,000 alternate fuel vehicles drives more than 1 million miles each business day. We have carbon neutral shipping services that we provide for customers. That's an easy, low-cost way to counterbalance our customers' emissions on documents, packages, and even freight. And we also have created more than 29,000 access points, which are consolidated delivery points that allow our customers to reduce the number of miles we have to drive and avoid unnecessary miles and unsuccessful delivery attempts for 60 million of our customers and members. And we know that we're living a circular economy. We're trying to eliminate waste. We provide seamless returns, which is a top priority for our retailers. And we're helping customers streamline their return programs and reclaim products at the end of life and reduce waste that's sent to landfill. Beyond this, I'd like to just share that this year we took 10,000 electric vehicles that we placed in order that we'll soon have on road, again, more than any other transportation company currently has on the road. And I'd really like to transition now to talk about how the foundation supports these initiatives. We have a long-standing commitment to community engagement, a long-standing commitment to interaction and its members. Our goal is to try to improve and strengthen communities where we live and work and prioritize volunteerism, our charitable contributions and engagements of our people, leveraging their skills through our humanitarian relief program. We provide programs that include things like funding the World Resources Institute, which we've been doing for a number of years to facilitate the development of greenhouse gas tracking by the private sector. The GRI protocols we have been funding for years to help organizations develop their tracking mechanisms. In fact, as the Interagency Panel on Climate Change has reduced or called for an escalation of greenhouse gas reduction efforts from the 2 degrees Celsius to 1.5, we've also funded WRI to help set new targets and help organizations understand when they're working on those targets and how to certify those organizations. I mentioned earlier about our electric fleet initiatives. We will also supported WRI, which is helping to develop a roadmap for sustainable transportation. And this research is developing models that will ensure that when we move to electric fleets, that municipal and state power grids are able to accommodate the growing fleets of electric vehicles so we don't blow the fuse, so to speak. And all of these items lead to our signature program, which we call the UPS Global Forestry Initiative. And back in 2012, we launched our initiative that aligns with our company's environmental and sustainability initiatives with 2 primary objectives: to support our sustainability team's objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and engage UPS employees in planting trees around the world and educating our employees around our sustainability efforts to plant 15 million trees by the end of 2020. And we know there are many benefits to this, both reducing carbon, the improved air quality, lower temps, providing fresh water, disaster recovery, helping to prevent flooding. All of you on this call, I'm sure, deal on a day-to-day with these challenges in international and developing countries. Globally to date, we've planted in 58 countries on 6 continents, including the boreal forest, and in places like Canada, China, France, India, Mexico, Poland, Great Britain, Vietnam, and many emerging markets across Africa. We also have something that we call the UPS employee forest. So while we've planted in 58 countries, our employees have actually planted over 170,000 trees in 38 countries and 49 states, including Puerto Rico, around the US. So we believe that 15 million trees can make a true difference in the world. We will be making an announcement later this year. All of that was put off due to COVID-19, and we plan to make an announcement moving forward tied to the Sustainable Development Goals later this year. We'll be hearing more about that. I did want to share one other project that we have been working on called the Green Heart Project. We also believe that trees can improve human health, and we've engaged with a program with the University of Louisville and the Nature Conservancy, the National Institute of Health. The project examines the link between city greening in urban environments and human health outcomes. An initial pilot was created at a middle school in Louisville where trees and shrubs were planted in the area around the school where the children learn and play to build a green barrier between a nearby highway and a schoolyard to improve air quality. And they got approval to take blood samples from all the children, and they developed a database of potential diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and asthma. And the results showed that the health of the children had improved. And so the Green Heart Project is now being scaled to a 5-year study that will include an entire urban neighborhood in Louisville. Up to 700 residents have agreed to be tested on a regular basis. And UPS is funding the Nature Conservancy, which will be planting 8,000 mature trees in this community. And over the next 3 years, this clinical study will be tested on a regular basis to monitor their health against a control group without additional green buffers. So in closing, I'd just like to share that UPS, again, supports this effort. We are here to support Interaction and its members. And over the next decade, we look forward to working alongside of you all and your members to improve the lives of communities through our humanitarian relief and resilience efforts, our environmental efforts, our diversity and inclusion initiatives, and through the volunteer efforts of UPSers who have committed over 20 million hours of volunteer service in this decade. So Noam and Sam, thank you again for allowing UPS to be a part of this today. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Joe. And I see people clapping across the muted screens, and it's just wonderful and heartening to see. And another wonderful injection of inspiration and can-do attitude with a real sort of tangible examples of the progress that can be made when you harness sort of innovation and tap the energy across a large corporation and lead an industry. So thank you for that, and thank you for being such a good partner to us and to our community. We did collect questions from the chat, and I'm also mindful of time. So what I would like to do is I'm going to actually bucket some questions that I've seen for each of you and ask you to respond to those. Mary, I'm going to be combining several together for you. Don't be surprised if there are 3 that are strung together or so. So I'm going to turn to Mary for those questions first, and then I'll turn to Joe. There's a clarifying question for you, and then to Sam. Let me turn to the questions to Mary first and give you a few minutes to try your best to respond to this combination, but I do want to highlight the questions. For example, John Kunrad from the Hunger Project says anti-climate heads of state are exploiting the COVID-19 crisis to reduce existing environmental protections. So what's the most effective way to fight that? And then, Carrie Hessler-Radelet from Project Concern International, a global communities partner, says that she's glad to see hope for the future, for future climate action, in the fact that people throughout the world are changing their behavior to address COVID-19. How can we do a better job of making climate change more personal and compelling? From Habitat for Humanity, John Akudago says climate change is a reality, but the challenge is how do we get the real people who suffer most to understand climate change and take action when there's no political will to act. So you can see a theme. A lot of this is about political will. He says he's afraid without commitment from the political leaders, we may continue to struggle for much longer than expected. And similarly, Ann Goddard from Child Fund says the intergenerational injustice that Mary, you spoke about, is spot on. How can we get government leaders to seek and listen to the opinions and voice of children from the global South? So a bunch of different questions, but they're all connected to this question of political will and engaging leaders globally. Mary, let me turn it to you for a couple minutes on that, and then I'll turn the question to Joe.
Okay, very good questions, and they deserve longer answers, but let me just touch on the answers, if I could put it that way. Yes, we are seeing leaders that are, anti-climate, if you like, climate denying leaders, trying to actually undo protections as an excuse to get the economy moving or for short-term economic reasons. We need to resist this, there's no doubt about it, and it's hard in countries, I'm thinking of what's happening in Brazil at the moment and other countries. On the second question, that people have changed their behavior and made it personal, I think this is really important. I think it's because people believed the science. That was really important. They believed the health advice. And we need to believe the scientists, the climate scientists. We need to get over the climate denial idea. Actually, expertise and science does matter, facts matter. And that's something that has been very helpful in the COVID situation. People have taken it personally and they've changed their habits. And that shows us that we can change. And it's a good lesson in climate, because a lot of the problem is a problem of what my good friend Kumi Naidu, who'll be known to some of you, often says, that there is a problem in the world of a disease that he calls affluence. And affluence is overspending in the rich parts of the world on goods that we don't need. The waste society, the throwaway society, that actually we need to reduce consumption in order to be sustainable with the world. Now, COVID is kind of a lesson in that. We've changed our behavior very dramatically, and we're down to basics now in homes. And we've forgotten, we're not that we've forgotten, but we're no longer interested in the luxuries that mattered more in a few weeks ago. And that's an interesting lesson, that we're down to an understanding that food maybe is better grown closer to home, closer to where we live, etc. And these will be lessons that we can take further. How to get real people to act when there's so little political will. I think the reference to the South, I actually find in developing countries, and I'm sure a number of you would agree with this, people are so aware of climate. It's everyday concern. It's undermining food production, it's undermining water, it's undermining everything. Everything is, and now on top of that, you have the COVID problem. On the whole, climate leaders in developing countries are so aware now of climate that they are trying to act on it. I think the denial of climate change is a short-term economic issue that is completely turned upside down by COVID-19. Look at the oil price now. Look at the negative oil price in the last day or two. That has kind of shown in a way the artificial nature of the economy that we have sustained, and hopefully will mean that we can go more quickly, as Joe has been talking about from the UPS's point of view, of going in the direction of clean, going in the direction of electric vehicles, and doing it in a very systematic way. I would really encourage the kind of benchmarks that UPS was setting for itself, for everyone in moving in that direction, because that's how we can really move. How do we listen to the intergenerational injustice? I think it's really important that young people have found their voice. They're very clear, and they were being very sort of, how would I say, very determined and resolute in their voice on climate. And people were almost getting annoyed that they were being very strong in saying, listen to the science, get your act together. We can't do it, we're children, you've got to do it. And of course, somehow now, because we've had to change our behavior so quickly, we're more open to what they were talking about. I think we're listening more to those children, including voices from developing countries who make it's harder for them to get their voice heard. It's the children, it's the Greta Thunbergs and children in Europe, children in Japan, and of course here in the United States that have been making their voice heard. But children in developing countries want us to listen to the science because they're very affected. I think what has happened is COVID-19 has undermined the status quo completely, the business as usual completely. The question is, how do we build back? We have to build back better, as we've learned. And you have a great opportunity with your NGO Climate Compact to really make this real, both in the United States and where you're working in developing countries, and to somehow learn lessons and learn from each other and help all of us to learn better so that we build back better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm glad you mentioned the efforts that UPS is, that Joe was talking about to move them forward, because it's a good segue to this question for Joe. Joe, you mentioned a lot of different areas of research and innovation that through the UPS Foundation you are seeding and encouraging. And there was a question from Betsy Teutsch from Dining for Women that was about renewable natural gas and whether that is something that that you've been looking at and using, and if so, could you explain it further?
Thanks, Noam, and I'll try my best. Again, my focus is predominantly on the foundation's programs, but I do know that earlier this year, it may have been late third quarter, fourth quarter last year, we made the largest purchase of renewable natural gas to help fuel our vehicles that has ever been acquired by a transportation organization. We are also funding research from the UPS Foundation, again, to help municipalities, government leaders to build into their future plans a roadmap so that they can incent the usage of renewable natural gas and provide incentives for the private sector and others to get on board and to mobilize and act now. So we continue to work with the World Resources Institute on that. Late last year, we also engaged some of the UN agencies who are now being asked and are starting to look at their own greenhouse gas emissions and connected them with WRI, which has a series of webinars and workshops that are available. Were created originally for the private sector, but now we're seeing more and more nonprofits who are starting to take a look at their own footprint. And I'll just say that, I think COVID-19 brings us towards a realization that, we need to focus on health system strengthening. COVID has shown the significant gaps in country supply chains are critically important to that. And we've been focused, really our disaster relief work has sort of evolved into humanitarian health system strengthening work, which is becoming a more predominant part of our work. Things like 3 years ago when we launched the first medical drone initiative in Africa and Rwanda, now it's in Ghana. To date, more than 60,000 deliveries of blood, essential vaccines, emergency vaccines are now available in remote communities within 30 minutes. For the last year and a half, we have operated the last mile vaccine delivery network, a pilot that we created in 3 districts in Uganda. And now we have seen USAID, Global Fund, and others, major donors that provide essential medicines to developing countries get on board. They're starting to put their products into this network, and they're now advocating for better supply chains in country to improve health outcomes as we look towards the next decade and how we're going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I truly believe that the COVID-19, while it's been devastating, may be the catalytic event that lights a fire under the world to take a look at these, the needs of so many and those that you all have in front of you and are taking a lead. And again, I just want to say that we at UPS truly appreciate the work that you do and the sacrifice that your people make on the front lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to turn to Sam Worthington for a lightning round question before we close the call, because we're just over time. But Sam, it was a good question that came in from Paul Miller from Lutheran World Relief, IMA World Health. His question was, how do we benchmark sustainability efforts and involve communities affected by climate change in the process? And how does that connect to the NGO Climate Compact? Sam, I'm going to give, just to make it extra challenging for you, we're going to sort of, this will be the 1-minute version of that question, that answer.
As NGOs, we have to choose to benchmark and set benchmarks ourselves on climate in terms of carbon footprint and so forth. But our core strength as NGOs is our ability to link communities together. And it's that ability to link a local community, its voice, its intent, with our own behavior, with the behavior as a collective, with a focus on the desire to change something as massive as climate change that we could bring. A lot of this is political will, and we point to the political will of others. In our case, I think it's about our political will. And what COVID shows us that as a community with compassion, with connections, and with the right will, we could change things and we could see societies change. And that lesson coming out of COVID is a lesson I think we need to apply in the coming, for the coming generation and for all time, a lesson that we can make a difference in what we know of climate change, and that from a grassroots level on up, that change is possible.
Thank you, Sam. And thanks to everyone. Interaction is going to be engaging on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all day. Please invite your audience to check out video pledges by member CEOs. Many of you on this call have actually submitted video pledges that are being promoted through social media. The text of the NGO Climate Compact itself is now available on our homepage at interaction.org, and it's still open for more signatures in the weeks to come. And although there was a tremendous amount of work put into getting us to this point, that's definitely worth celebrating. This is just the beginning for many of us. Interaction will continue to stand in solidarity with the environmental movement that has done so much to get us here, with the scientists, as Mary talked about, with people affected by climate change in their communities around the world. We will be in solidarity with all of those groups, and we will continue to work with signatories over the next 2 years to support implementation of this compact in the 4 key areas of commitment. So we look forward to working with many of you, and we thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you.